Hello, this is Dr. Nalule, and here with me is Dr. Parulian Sihotang, an oil and gas expert from Indonesia. Today's discussion is going to focus on corruption in the oil and gas sector as a result of accounting frauds. But before we start, I'd like Dr. Parulian to briefly introduce himself.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Victoria, for inviting me to this prestigious extractive hub. I'm Parulian Sihotang. Indonesia is the country of my origin. I hold a PhD in accounting from the University of Dundee, and I'm now continuing my research on the energy transition policy. I've been in the industry, in the oil and gas industry, for more than 15 years now, and my last post is actually supervising and controlling the finance of more than 300 production sharing contracts in Indonesia, in Indonesian oil and gas upstream regulatory body. So today, really appreciate that I'd like to share my experience on how the accounting frauds will lead to corruption in oil and gas sectors.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm really impressed by your experience. Like, you have more than 10 years experience, so we have the right person, the right expert to take us through the issue of corruption in the oil and gas sector. Like, not many people have really brought up the issue of accounting fraud, and I myself, I should admit, I don't really understand what it is. So before we dig into the discussion, could you please give us a brief overview of accounting fraud in the oil and gas sector?
Yes, the history of oil and gas sectors, I think we found out that a lot of accounting fraud lead to corruption and lead to corporation bankruptcy. For example, in Enron case, the collapse of Enron, the energy company based in Houston, America, in 2001, I think, is one of the biggest accounting scandal in oil and gas, where the company used creative accounting to inflate their profit and then to inflate their tax payment as well. And also they hide losses and expenses in numerous SPV, special purpose vehicle. And then also I think they published fraudulent financial reporting in order to make their performance good in the eyes of investors. And other examples probably from the other parts of the world. In China, for example, CNPC, China National Petroleum Corporation, I think we look at the media when one of the top officials of the giant oil and gas company sent into jail because of the problem of valuing the assets and also inflating the stock price. And in Nigeria, for example, now I think there is a big corruption case, more than $1 billion, where the government sued the Dutch Royal Shell company as well as the Italian-based Eni company. And also Canadian company, Pan West Petroleum Company, also facing accounting fraud when they're trying to sifting their expenses and capitalize that expenses into the assets and make their profit looking good. So it's not surprising to me that the recent result from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiner that conclude oil and gas sector had more than average fraud in the areas of corruption with a lot of financial reporting fraud.
Thank you very much for the brief overview. Now, I noticed that with respect to accounting fraud, like the way you've been analyzing it, it's mostly on the part of the investors, the oil and gas companies. Because in most cases, when we're talking about the resource curse and corruption in maybe developing countries, Indonesia, African countries, in most cases, we're looking at government officials. So what can the government do? What should developing countries do, the governments, to ensure that they tackle this issue of accounting fraud in the oil and gas sector?
Yes, Dr. Victoria, before answering your question, let me share with you, the accounting is actually the language of business. So the accounting product is actually producing statements that communicate the performance of the company towards the investors, towards the internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. And three main statements is financial statement, statement of financial position, or balance sheet, and then income statement, statement of profit and loss, and also the cash flow statement. So the accounting will communicate essential information about the corporation towards outside. So actually, how the accounting fraud conducted is very simple. Is not a rocket science techniques actually. Only three main accounting techniques that being done for the accounting fraud that has been committed by the companies that I mentioned before. The earnings manipulation, and then the cash flow manipulation, and also the key metrics manipulation. So for example, in earnings manipulation, the company tried to record the revenue too early, or the company record fake revenue, or the company will shift the expenses from current year to the next year. And then the company could also shift the future revenue to the current year revenue in order to look good on their financial performance. And as far as the cash flow manipulation is concerned, as you're probably aware that now investors are increasingly focused on the quality cash that any corporation has. So the highest quality cash that the corporation has is actually the cash from core business, the cash flow generated from the normal operating of the business. So there are two other cash flow sources. That is cash flow from financing, borrowing money from outside, cash flow from investing, when the company selling their assets. So the company would like to have those two less quality cash flow and shift them into the normal or core business cash flow. So that's why how the cash flow manipulation is going on, in order for the company disclose good performance. And for the key metrics manipulation, actually it's about financial ratio calculation, where the company mislead the investors with fake ratio and trying to inflate their performance. So how to tackle these manipulation? Well, actually, first of all, you have to start with the internal aspect of the organization. You have to strengthen the internal control system within the organization. By that, the company should develop or design policies and procedures to make sure that the operation runs effectively, the operation runs efficiently, and they publish reliable or credible financial reporting, as well as they have to comply with rules and regulation. So it's basically how the company should do risk assessment regularly. However, if you look at that international standard nowadays, I think the government of where these oil and gas company operating need to enforce the introduction of the international standard, the so-called ISO 37001, which is the anti-bribery management system. So I think that will be very crucial and very important standard that the government should enforce to the company.
All right, so in your opinion, would you think that accounting fraud in the oil and gas sector is rapid in developing countries and it's less in developed countries, or it's just the same? Because what I'm understanding is the company basically has control over its financial flows or accounting books of accounting. So the government would rarely come to intervene to see, okay, are they really giving us the correct information? So is the situation different in developed countries?
So I think it's the same. Based on the accounting fraud experience that I already mentioned before, you have Enron cases in America. We have Petrobras, I think, in Brasilia. We have cases in Nigeria. We have cases in Indonesia as well, in China. So I don't think the country specific will have a different in terms of how the accounting fraud will lead to corruption in oil and gas sector. Moreover, if you are aware that the accounting standard is now harmonized, with the so-called generally accepted accounting principles. So, oil and gas in other developing countries, I think, will implement the same accounting standard in developed countries. So I think there will be the same chance of doing the accounting fraud. But bear in mind, in all fraud, I think we know the triangle of fraud triangle, where there is an opportunity to commit triangle, and where is the pressure to commit the fraud, and there is a rationalization. When these three elements of fraud, meeting, then that also will create problems, fraud, and all those things, not only in the accounting sectors, but also in other sectors.
All right, thank you very much for that. Before we close, I would like you to give advice to the young people out there, maybe the people in Indonesia, in Asian countries, and all the young people out there who would want to get more experience or expertise in accounting in the oil and gas sector. What advice would you give them? And also, what advice would you give governments to ensure that they can effectively tackle the issue of accounting fraud? So you're giving advice to two people: first the governments, and then the rest is for the young people out there, people who would want to join the oil and gas sector, but through accounting and finance.
Thank you, Dr. Victoria. So as I mentioned before, greed is actually the main source of every fraud. So I think the ethics and integrity should be the core foundation for business. So in that case, any profession, accounting and all other professions, should enforce ethics and integrity. Okay, so for the young generation, I think oil and gas is still a very prospective industry. And based on my experience, the industry also give you chances and opportunity to grow with your professional expertise. So go for it, and I believe you still have a lot of bright future and opportunity to empower your potentials. And as for the government, I believe that by enforcing the international standard ISO 37001, which is the entire bribery management system, that standard should be enforced to the oil and gas sector, because that standard will be able to prevent, to detect, and also to address the bribery issues, which is one of the main problematic issues right now in the oil and gas industry, both in developing country and in developed country. So I believe by having that standard in place, hopefully the industry will be more transparent and will be more profitable as well, and that will be fair for all the stakeholders. And the last thing, the accounting scandal happened because of all the information of the company now is focusing on how to attract investors and how to make your stock price looking good. So I think the bottom line is not the only performance indicator of the company. So we should move from the financial accounting towards the so-called sustainability accounting, where the dimension of social, dimension of environment, and of course the economic will be integrated when you assess the company performance.
Thank you very much for that. And this will not be a question, but it will just be a comment, because you've mentioned that in most countries they still need their oil and gas resources. So we need to ensure that they handle the corruption in oil and gas due to accounting fraud. But now there's also this move towards a low carbon economy. Recently I was reading the World Bank cut off finances to investments that are geared towards oil and gas. And for developing countries, and I also know for Indonesia, because you are still heavily reliant on oil and gas, fossil fuels, to meet your energy needs, that's an issue that is really haven't yet been tackled, because most developing countries are like, we still need oil and gas, but then globally we are like, we have to transition to a low carbon economy. But maybe that's something we'll discuss later on. It was very nice having you. Thank you very much. We've learned a lot from you. And our viewers, if you have any questions relating to accounting in the oil and gas sector, if you want to learn more about corruption, if you want any contacts with respect to Indonesia, oil and gas, please feel free to contact Dr. Parulian. I'll be sharing with you his contact details, email address, phone number, and yeah, feel free to reach out to him. Any final words from you to our viewers? Anything you want to say?
Well, again, thank you so much. I think for me, accounting is always fun. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Stay tuned. Do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Victoria Nalule. I'll be bringing you more experts from different countries. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.